All right, back to it now. It is a constitutional crisis in Texas. There's no other way to look at it. Anybody that's not paying attention to this is not paying attention. You've got the Supreme Court of the United States making a terrible decision to side with the federal government and saying that the federal government can go in and take down the barriers in Eagle Pass and anywhere in Texas for that matter. Every time this administration fights at the border, it fights against Arizona, it fights against Texas, it fights against the sovereignty of this country, and the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, said no more. He's citing Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. He's also citing Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 of the Constitution, saying they have a right. In fact, he says Joe Biden has a duty to protect Texas, which is not happening. Daniel Miller now joining me, the president of the Texas Nationalist movement, which is Texit, talking about leaving the union altogether. Daniel, good to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Steve.
Very busy time in Texas right now. Give us your perspective on the ground there right now. What are you hearing? What do you think's happening? What's the next move?
Well, look, it appears that after many years of criticism, Governor Abbott's holding the line on this issue. And I understand from the viewpoint of a lot of people that this is just about a 2.5-mile stretch of the border out of 1,254 miles. But it's become much more than that. It's become a symbol of Texas standing up and in the face of this forced invasion, this forced collapse of our border by the federal government. And so consequently, what we've got here now is the issue brought to the forefront, this thing that we have talked about for so many years, Steve, the broken relationship between the states and the federal government. And, I think the Biden administration is definitely looking to escalate. There's been a ceaseless drone from the Democrats calling specifically to federalize the National Guard troops. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to have to just kind of buckle up and see where this heads.
Well, it's going to be a problem. You see, here's the thing. As you probably know, Daniel, the border has now become the number one issue for most voters. It's actually moved out in front of the economy, and that's saying a hell of a lot. So what are they going to do? March federal troops on Texas, take control of the National Guard, and force the National Guard to rip down barriers under the guidance of Grandpa? I don't see that. On the other hand, you can't let Texas snub the United States Supreme Court. So what do you do? Or is this by design so that if Donald Trump is elected president, the National Guard, say in Minnesota, if there's a riot in Minneapolis, could ignore Donald Trump saying, I'm federalizing the National Guard of Minnesota, they could ignore him. There's nothing good about any of this. There's nothing good about any of this. It creates a huge problem, of course, for your movement, for the Texit movement, which means an independent nation of Texas. This is fueling that effort.
100%. I mean, look, we're heading into territory now that our organization has predicted since our inception. Back in 2005, this is the moment that we wanted to absolutely avoid. We've been ringing the bell, the alarm bell, since then, saying that this was ultimately where an out-of-control federal government was going to take this issue. And at some point, states were either going to have to capitulate, Texas in particular. They were either going to have to capitulate to federal overreach or at some point stand up. And the way that this can be avoided, as we have said time and time again, is for Texas to have a vote on this issue, become a self-governing independent nation, and then protect our border in the manner that we see fit. But now we're in this situation of the Biden administration's making, and let's not just pin it on Biden. I mean, this is the federal government as a whole. While we are in a presidential election year, we can't forget that we're still having to deal with 2.5 million unelected federal bureaucrats that will never be on the ballot. The same ones that tried to cut Donald Trump's legs out from under him when he attempted to do something to secure the border. So here we are at this moment in history where Texans and people in other states are going to have to ask themselves, if we're going to secure our border, if we're going to maintain the way of life and the values that we believe in, frankly, we're going to have to do it without the federal government.
Well, and here's my question to you today, Daniel. What are the numbers telling you? What are the polls? Because here, you go back 5 years, your movement didn't have a lot of momentum. But since Joe Biden has taken office, it's gotten stronger and stronger. And with this at Eagle Pass, I have got to believe the support for the Texit Now movement has gotten stronger because it's not just Texas now. Kevin Stitt, the governor of Oklahoma, says, I stand with Texas. Put that out. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, says, I stand with Texas. We'll send more National Guard support, whatever they need. And so then you look at Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. You end up with a whole group of states saying, look, we're not interested in playing this game anymore. The Texas movement becomes a lot bigger. What is the support, do you think, in the state of Texas to start with?
Well, here's the good news. I don't have to think about it. It's been an issue that's been polled pretty consistently for well over a decade now. You know, we're in a situation where in 2014 we were polling right at 50% of support in Texas. But then you fast forward to 2022, the Survey USA poll that came out in that summer, and it was unequivocal. If Texas goes on the ballot tomorrow, 66% of likely voters and 60% of voters overall would vote Texas out. So there has been a steady growth in support for Texas because ultimately Texans are coming to the realization that no matter who controls Congress or who controls the White House, the ultimate trajectory of the federal government is to crush our sovereignty, destroy our rights, and really extend those federal tentacles and that cancer into every facet of our lives. So, you know, we're at a point now where we're obviously seeing the momentum pushing toward having this vote. It's just unfortunate that we're having to get to this point because of a constitutional crisis on the border when so many Texans are suffering.
So why can't you accelerate the vote? Why do you have to wait? Why couldn't you have the vote, say, in November of this year? What does it take to put this before the people of Texas? If you have 60% support, you have a failure of the federal government to do what is clearly outlined in the Constitution. I mean, I've read it. It's quite clear. And the Texas Constitution as well gives it constitutional authority to defend itself, as it should. Nobody would have ever signed on to the Constitution if the states weren't allowed to defend themselves independently from an invasion, which this is by any definition. Why not accelerate it?
Well, and we can. You know, that's the point here. What we have faced over the years is exactly what every independence movement faces around the world over the last 100 years, which is intransigence from a political establishment. You know, they don't want to relinquish that power to the people. And so you see these movements build up in massive popular support until they hit a certain threshold where you have this catalyzing moment or you have this tipping point of public support, which is where we're at on both accounts here in Texas right now. So if we want to accelerate this, it's quite simple. We have already, I penned a letter to the governor this week calling on him to call a special session of the Texas legislature for the purpose of letting Texans vote on the question, should the state of Texas reassert its status as an independent nation? We've accompanied that letter along with the petition signatures that we delivered to the Republican Party of Texas back in December, which frankly is about 7 times the number that Abbott submitted 2 years ago for the election. So This could be done really quickly.
All right. Texitnow.org if anybody's interested in what's going on in Texas. It is a constitutional crisis. It is real, folks. And you should be paying very close attention to what happens next. Will they march federal troops into Texas? That won't look good. Will they let Texas snub the Supreme Court? That won't look good. Texitnow.org. Daniel, thank you for getting up early and being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Really appreciate it. There it is. Biggest story of the day. I'll be right back.